What sport do you not really think is a sport? I think it's considered a sport in the same sense as chess is considered a sport. Certain kinds of poker, e.g. Texas Hold'em, which have the player vs the whole table, require strategy and mental skill to be good and win at. You need to be able to pick up on opponents' tells while being aware of and hiding your own, and you need to understand what makes a good hand and when to fold or when to raise, know when to hold M, know when to fold M, know when to walk away, know when to run. Personally, I wouldn't consider either poker or chess to be a sport so much as a contest of minds, but I can understand why they're considered as such. And it was honestly my favorite event to watch, specifically the men's park finals. All those kids were just super stoked to be there, pushing their sport to new limits. Aussies were hugging their Brazilian competitors after each run, and those hugs seemed so much more genuine than, for example, the rather cold hugs seen between competitors in women's gymnastics. I was never all that interested in skateboarding, but it was a really cool event to watch, if for nothing other than their incredible sportsmanship. What's so weird about the Chinese spelling bee? Sure, there's only about a few thousand characters in common usage, but there's like a shit ton of obscure archaic characters no one uses anymore. If anything, they're probably harder than American ones, because while you can sound out English words, you can't really sound out Chinese words, you know it or you don't. Like, fuck me if I were in it and the first word they give is like. Every time I am like, oh, this is not really all that hard. These people are not athletes, I pretty much eat my words. Oh, climbing competitions, sure, climbing is hard, but what is competitive about it? Turns out everything that sport is fucking insane, and those people are some of the most in shape badass athletes out there. Disc golf was another one. Those people are so fucking good, they have different disc for different shots, they have to plan out every throw. And like thread their disc through trees from 400 feet away. They are fucking insane. If people are watching it on TV, it's probably a sport and people are probably pretty badass at it. There is a cliff diving circuit that is pretty badass too. There are a lot of cool spots and a lot of them are posted on YouTube. When I was young and dumb, I got up to 120 miles per hour on a straight, clear highway and my heart rate was jacked. I used to think NASCAR was dumb. But I watched the F1 race last weekend, they get up to 380 miles per hour, tailgating. I get nervous when someone tailgates me at 40 miles per hour, in traffic, on windy roads. The adrenaline dump must be so intense. And then do that for 2 hours straight, only to take last place. Respect. Mad respect. Big F1 supporter now. So this is an interesting question, as it revolves around what people's definition of sport actually is. For me, it's where two or more people are actively competitively engaging in something to win. And so therefore it doesn't necessarily have to be athletic to be a sport. That said, for me, people who actually play Quidditch in real life are a joke. Update, sport, v. C 1400, to take pleasure, to amuse oneself, from Old French disporter, deporter to divert, amuse, please, play, to seek amusement, literally carry away, the mind from serious matters, from de away, see dis, plus porter to carry, from Latin portar to carry. Turns out that etymology seems to be the best sport of all, rolling on the floor laughing. Chess. When I was a geometry teacher, I used to take my students through an interesting discussion where I listed 20 activities: bowling, baseball, gymnastics, car racing, darts, Call of Duty, chess, etc., and asked them to identify which ones were sports. Then, As I ask students why they felt a particular activity qualifies as a sport, students often found their justification resulted in a contradiction with their other answers. They then were asked to write their own definition of sport that would align with every single one of their opinions. It was very challenging, and some found that they just had to change their opinion. Try writing a definition of sport where archery qualifies but darts does not. Geometry involves careful wording of definitions, postulates, and theorems, and this was an interesting way of introducing them to that idea. I know that joke gets tossed around a lot, but sweeping around the house and sweeping a curling rock are completely different things. When sweeping a curling rock, you place all of your weight, even to the point of leaning over the broom on your tiptoes, on a slippery piece of fabric, then with all your strength press down even harder on your broom, move it back and forth as quickly as you can, since you're trying to create friction to melt the ice, meanwhile maintaining the pace of a jog, all the while your skip is screaming at you from the top of their lungs inside of an echoey building to go faster. Do that for about an hour and you've done one game. If that's what your household chores are like, then I feel bad for you. Curler here. Depending on ice condition, you can really slay some calories sweeping. And the skill needed to do your shot precisely as the skip called it is difficult. Very narrow angle and the amount of weight, push, you apply to the stone. Not to mention the skip has to read the ice to figure out how much the stone will curl, and decide when to have the sweepers sweep to alter the trajectory and distance of the stone. Not as easy as it looks. Besides, we don't all wear those electric curling pants like the Norwegian Olympic team. We take it pretty seriously. I used to think that until I decided to try it in high school. Trying to keep up with the rock at full takeout speed is difficult enough without having to sweep as hard and fast as you possibly can, all while on ice. It involves a lot more coordination and physical fitness than many other activities in this thread that people are suggesting as sports. Take a look online at the majority of the top teams in the sport right now, and outside of the odd outlier, most are in pretty decent shape. First couple times doing it, my calves and quads were definitely feeling it the next day from the slide involved when throwing the 44-pound rock down the ice as well. There are elitists in gold for certain, but most like my friends and I are just looking to spend time outside hanging out away from wives/so's and having some drinks. No douchebaggery at all. It also isn't cheap, but it isn't the most expensive sport I have ever played either. Get a set of beginner clubs and you are set for several years. At a professional level it is definitely a sport, but definitely not a waste. Most cases that land would be used for some other industrial bullshit if it wasn't. I know I won't change your mind, but wanted to offer a perspective. I'm about to be downvoted into oblivion, but any sport where the scoring is subjective. If there's judges involved, it's not a sport. I'm not saying it doesn't take a tremendous amount of discipline, coordination, and physicality to compete in figure skating, or synchronized swimming, gymnastics or skateboarding. It may sound like a contradiction, but I consider people who participate in these activities to be true athletes, but so does ballroom dancing or cheerleading, or a circus trapeze act. The only reason we consider some activities sports and others not is because of their inclusion in the Olympics. If scoring is subjective, then the personal bias of each judge becomes part of the scoring, or worse, judges have been known to cheat or accept bribes, so how can you truly say who is the best at any sport where subjectivity is involved? Until you develop an AI computerized judge and remove the fallibility of human judges, you can't say it's a sport in the truest sense. Golf. It is a pastime, not a sport. That doesn't mean there isn't an incredibly high level of skill involved with it, and loads of practice required. However, there is hardly any physical activity involved, and pretty much it becomes a competition of who can perform, approximately, one particular motion better than others. Just because it requires more strength from a very specific subset of muscles, doesn't fundamentally change it from darts or billiards or archery or even skee-ball at the arcade. Perform approximately the same motion as few times as possible, trying to hit the target as soon as possible. I have two. Firstly, horse racing. The horses are the ones running, while the jockeys just sit there and beat the horse up to try and make it run faster. Then kill them if they hurt themselves trying to do what they're being forced to do. Yeah, they have to balance on the horse, but it's not hard. I've done horse riding and gymnastics in the past, and I can tell you that the balance required for horse racing is nowhere near an actual balancing sport like gymnastics. Also golf. Sorry, not sorry, but the only playing you actually do is when you're standing still. By that definition, me standing on one side of the room trying to throw trash in the bin out of pure laziness, is a sport. If you judge a sport by the worst players, then I'm guessing you don't understand the sport very well. The guys who eat and smoke a ton after rounds always suck at golf. Look at the PGA Tour. All the world's top golfers are extremely physically fit, and all the pros are banned from using carts, meaning they have to walk upwards of 5 miles around, for 4 consecutive days. You can't judge a sport based on the people who suck at it, otherwise you could make arguments that any of the other major sports aren't sports. I know it's semantics, but they're curling rocks/stones that weigh 44 pounds, not discs. Secondly, that definition of sports doesn't make a lot of sense. By that definition, acting would be a sport because people are willing to sit around and watch it. Also, according to the source, more people watched the men's curling finals at the 2018 Olympics than the men's hockey finals. Granted, it helps that the Americans were in the curling finals but weren't in the hockey finals, but that still means that more people watched gold medal curling than gold medal hockey. You are correct that it requires a lot of precision. I feel it's one of those sports where once you realize how hard it is to get a rock even in the general area of where you want it, it becomes all the more impressive that they're able to choose a place on the ice and hit it exactly, at least 9 times out of 10. You're also correct that it requires a lot of physical effort. There's a reason why most curlers at the elite level look like they're in good shape. It's because they have to be. I played lead when I curled, which meant I threw the first 2 stones then swept the next 6, and let me tell you, you get exhausted by the end of a game. As this photo shows, you put all of your weight onto a slippery piece of cloth while using all your strength to push down on the broom while also moving the broom back and forth as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, your skip is screaming from the top of their lungs inside an echoey building to get you to go faster. I'm pretty sure the only reason that curlers don't sweat too much is because curling rinks are ice rinks, so they're very cold most of the time. Motorsport isn't a sport? You do realize drivers literally lose like 3 kgs over the course of a race, right? The fitness and training required not only to keep to the weight limit but to actually be able to resist the forces being put through your body is immense. Even the pit crew are training hard, and I do believe they have or had mandated gym time and had to stick to diet plans to ensure they were also at the top of their game. Then there's the strategy and skill. It requires skills across the board, be it the driver themselves, the pit crew, strategists, engineers, or even the designers, manufacturers and mechanics. They all need to be at the top of their game to win. Well, it's a motorsport, which is a whole different kettle of fish really. But you are right, the car is equally, if not more important than the driver, but it's not like the cars just pop up out of nowhere. It's a team sport, and the team have to build the cars. The driver is really just one player out of a whole team. It's not just about who is the best driver, but also who can build the best car within the regulations. Another thing I'd add, the ratio of driver-car being the defining factor varies between different motorsports. It's widely considered that with motorbike racing like MotoGP or the TT for example, the rider can make up more for a machinery deficit than in F1. See Marc Marquez winning titles on a bike nobody else can ride. You also get spec or single make series where the machinery is identical, at which point it's just the team's ability to set up the vehicle effectively, and the pilot's skills. Although the cars contribute to most of the performance, I think it's hard to see the impact of drivers because the ones racing are the tiny percentage of the best drivers in the world, so the difference between them is minimal. I would argue it's more impressive than most sports though. I could play football with professionals. Put me as a striker for Real Madrid and I could play. I would be terrible in comparison, but I could. I wouldn't be able to take one corner in an F1 car however. Once you've learned how the thing functions, you need elite level fitness just to cope with it moving. This is all before talking about being competitive. Personally, I think motorsports more than qualify as sports. I think there is a difference between a sport and an athletic competition. A sport needs to have a winner decided by a set of defined achievements like fastest time, most scores, etc. An athletic competition is something that a winner is decided purely by judging who did a task best based on an arbitrary standard. Like figure skating, diving, gymnastics, etc. Both take a lot of skill and training, but if it needs judges to say who wins a different day with the same exact performance, a different judge could rate someone better just based off of their opinion, so it is not sport. Although the cars contribute to most of the performance, I think it's hard to see the impact of drivers because the ones racing are the tiny percentage of the best drivers in the world, so the difference between them is minimal. I would argue it's more impressive than most sports though. I could play football with professionals. Put me as a striker for Real Madrid and I could play. I would be terrible in comparison, but I could. I wouldn't be able to take one corner in an F1 car however. Once you've learned how the thing functions, you need elite level fitness just to cope with it moving. This is all before talking about being competitive. Personally, I think motorsports more than qualify as sports. While I don't want to act as if this is the actual definition of a sport and is more of a personal opinion about how sports and competitions should be categorized, I think sports as we generally conceptualize them need to require at least one active opponent while the game is in play. Anything you can have a personal best in while playing by yourself isn't a sport. Therefore, a sport would be football, chess, esports, curling. All are sports because you have to not only master your technical/physical abilities but also social ability to strategize and counterplay your opponent. As a former reasonably high-level athlete, my definition of a sport has always been an activity in which other people's physical actions can affect the outcome of what you were capable of accomplishing. Examples: football, wrestling, baseball, cricket, lacrosse, water polo, cheerleading, etc. Things that I don't think count as sports: golf, track and field events, swimming, Celtic events, and even powerlifting. These are all very athletic activities that require incredible skill as well as years and years of training, but I think of them as events and competition that are not sports. Then there are events and games: bowling, chess, pool, poker, etc. These are mental activities and games. They're competitive, but they're not sports.